Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Grace Committed Chats, brought to you by Grace Committed Church here in Philadelphia. I am your host, Caleb Watt, here with my tall. I'm going to use tall today.
I was wondering what you were going to say.
No,
I was hoping for something new, but
no, this time it works
not.
because the last guest on the podcast was not your height.
Oh, I see. Good. I thought you were about to say it was not tall or something else.
Yeah, I'm a little bit more cordial than that, but my tall co-host, Pastor Doug. Pastor Doug, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How about yourself, Caleb?
I'm doing fantastic because we have some spicy questions here.
Spicy.
In our last episode of the relationships series, I suppose, on these podcasts. And so, yeah, it's just a round of questions, I suppose. I think you put these questions into the doc, so you know what you're getting yourself into.
Well, these were the questions that were basically kind of left over from the various panels and other forums that we've had as we've been talking about relationships.
Mm-hmm.
I know that on Sundays we've already moved on from it, but I thought it'd be nice to sort of tie it up, right? Just to sort of tie up the loose strands and just cap off what was, I think, a really good time of talking about relationships.
Yeah, and see some of your opinions on some of these spicy topics. So how do you want me to do this, Pastor Doug? Do you want me to just go down the list? Or?
I just want to first start just by saying, because most of these questions actually are on like dating and marriage, and I don't want that to be the only thing we talk about, though we'll mostly talk about that. I just wanted to mention that I think actually what was surprising to me, like coming out of the relationship series, was how much like people really wanted to talk about friendship. We spent 2 weeks on Sundays talking about friendship. And I thought that'd be like plenty, like 2 weeks. Every other topic only got 1 week, but I think people actually really wanted more. But I think the thing I want to leave friendship at is that this is something that will require work. I think the reason people are interested in because it's showing a need. There's a real need in people's hearts for deep friendship. But the truth is, in this world we live in, we've in many ways lost the ability of how to make friends. I remember when I was a kid, just go out on the playground and you just like make a friend so easily. But as we've gotten older, as certain like fears, social anxieties, different things, we've been conditioned by social media and all that kind of stuff. And we've lost the ability to make friends. We've lost the ability to talk to people and to build organic friendships. But I think we just got to remember that if we want it, it's going to require work. And my encouragement for the church is that we would not neglect this important area. As I said in the beginning, friendships are in many ways the foundation of all the relationships in our lives. If we don't have good friendships, we're not going to be able to have good dating relationships. We're not going to be able to have good marriages. We're not going to be able to have good, really any other relationship, because we need friendships to be the base of acceptance, the base level of support that we find from others. So friendship, very important.
Well, what a spicy take, Peter.
I don't know how spicy that was.
Spicy
yeah,
at
probably,
all.
I hope it's not
just
spicy.
wanted to say spicy for the sake of saying spicy.
If that was spicy, then I don't know. Then I mean, we're living in a weird world. Then but, I feel like most people know we need friends.
Shoot. But all right, I like that. Prologue to our interesting questions today, Pastor Doug.
But now we're on to the spicy stuff.
Yeah, now we're on to the spicy things. This is what everyone tuned in for. This is the main meat of our content today.
So is that just carrots or like lettuce or?
That was the appetizers. So,
okay. That makes sense. The bread, the dinner rolls.
Bread, yeah. The Olive Garden rolls. So, but anyways, here, let's get started. First question that we have: how does one maintain healthy emotional boundaries while dating, but still feel like they know the person enough to marry them? Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah. And actually, I think this ties nicely into what I just was talking about friendship, because I think the reason why people feel like you have to just like unload all your emotional baggage at the beginning of like a dating relationship is because they're like holding all these things that they never shared with anyone, because too often people don't have friends that know those things about them. And particularly see this a lot in brothers, because I think brothers really struggle to be able to share emotionally what they're feeling, what they're going through, the things that are like they're actually thinking about on like a day-by-day basis with other brothers. But then when they come along a sister who is friendly towards them and opening up a little bit, they suddenly, boom, like unload, right? The truth is, like I've actually talked to some sisters who've said that sometimes on like the first date, they get so overwhelmed by the brother who just overshares and just talks so much because they feel like this is an open like an open invitation for them to unload all the things that they were holding in for so long. And that's a very unhealthy way to start a relationship. And, you know, a lot of sisters get freaked out by that. They're like, whoa, 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 whoa. I don't want to be the bearer of all your emotional baggage. So I think the reason why people struggle with this area is because they probably don't have friends who they're able to share like their emotions and their struggles with. Because if you don't have that, once you have like a dating relationship, you're going to feel like, oh, I need to unload it all. But the truth is, like, you can't, if you have it in a friendship, you don't unload all your emotional baggage up front. It happens organically. And the same thing should happen with a dating relationship. But it should be growing, right? You should be growing, right? I'm not saying withhold everything until the day you get married, like withhold all of the emotional thoughts you've had. Then that person will be like, whoa, you're not the person I married, right? You want the person that's marrying you to know who you are, but it shouldn't start at the very beginning, right? You shouldn't lay out all your dirty laundry, all your dirty secrets on the very first date, because otherwise you're just setting up too high expectations for one another. You're also just causing the other person to be like, feel like they have to bear all your burdens. And so, yeah, but ultimately it should happen organically.
Do you feel like that process should be like slower than in friendship or like at the same rate?
It depends, I think, on the season you're in, right?
Okay.
If you're like, excuse me, if you're like, you know, past 30 and you're dating, right, you might want to happen a little faster because you probably want to find out quickly whether or not this person is the one you want to marry. Versus if you're like a college student dating, it's like, take your time. You have plenty of time. Don't rush things. Don't speed up. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself probably breaking boundaries if you speed up the process a little bit.
And I know you briefly touched on it a little bit, right, in that response, but like the idea of like having some in reserve, right, like some room to still go or grow, I suppose, in closeness. Like, do you feel like there's a cap to how close you should get in dating before you get married? Right?
I mean, it's a subjective thing, but you know, the one area that really bothers me is when like people unload all their previous relationship history on the first date. Obviously, you want to share that with someone, right? You don't want to withhold information and lie or like, you know, give a false impression of who you are. But to do on the first dates, like that's not appropriate, right? You should wait and allow that to come out as you start to develop trust and comfort together, as you start to see a little bit more compatibility. Because on the first date, right, you don't know if you're really that compatible yet. And so if you unload everything, it's like, well, now what is that person going to do with it if they don't feel like they like you back, right? Now they know all this stuff and it just complicates matters. So, like I said, there's no like hard and fast rule.
Okay.
But you know, you should start to be opening up your heart, right? Yeah. But at point of engagement, you want to have comfort that you know the person well, right? And then it's really an engagement season where you hopefully bring out a lot of the stuff that maybe like you didn't tell up front, just to make sure that you do have comfort that this is the person that you want to marry.
Premarital counseling.
Well, pre-engagement counseling too, I think is very important. You know,
really?
So going through certain questions to make sure you understand each other even before you get engaged. Yeah. But premarital counseling obviously is very important too. But I also think pre-engagement counseling is important.
That's a take I haven't heard before yet. Anyways, let's continue. Do you believe that God has a single person picked out for us to marry? Or do you think he respects our choice and makes all things work for his glory?
I mean, the way this question is worded, it makes it kind of obvious, right?
Yeah.
What the answer is, right? I think God respects our choice, but that's just the reality of all things. Like God calls us to a life of wisdom. Wisdom is knowing for ourselves what is right. You know, like if we aren't able to ever know for ourselves what is good and right, then have we really like been transformed in the renewal of our minds? You know, as it says in Romans 12, because God wants to transform our minds to like know what is good, right? Right? You know, to know what is acceptable, right? To know His will. It's we should be able to discern His will on our own through the wisdom we have. And so I think God doesn't like preordain a person, you know, for us to marry, but He wants us to use our wisdom in determining who. And so while there isn't one person, I think there's lots of wrong people, right? You know, there isn't one right person, but there's plenty of wrong people. And so I think the issue, the wisdom is this determine who is not like, who would actually be like a good, you know, who would be like a wise person, a wise choice to pursue, you know, to pursue a relationship with, right? So wisdom is discerning what's right from wrong, not necessarily what is the only choice.
That's fair.
But caveat is once you do get married, then that is the only and right person, right? You know, you don't have a soulmate before you're married, But once you're married, you have a soulmate. It's that person that you said I do to, right? And then you will work on everything to preserve that relationship, right? God doesn't preordain a soulmate, but you have a soulmate once you're married, right?
That's
because
fair.
He made that covenant of basically that covenant, a marriage covenant together, a covenant that's meant to last your entire life.
Yeah. All right. I like that answer. No other questions from me. All right.
Nice.
Next, dating. If we need to guard against being too emotionally and physically intimate during dating, what are the observable hallmarks of dating that set it apart from friendship? Oh, that's a good question too.
Well, I think it's just over time.
Uh-huh.
It's the commitment and intimacy you have. Intimacy increases as commitment increases, right? The more you are committed to one another, right? The longer your relationship, the more you are serious about it, you allow intimacy to increase. And so, right, friends, you don't always get that intimate with. I mean, there is a level of intimacy, right, you should have in your friendships. But dating will eventually surpass that intimacy. Not necessarily, hopefully, obviously, I'm not saying you go like all the way, right? There are certain boundaries in place on the physical side as well as the emotional side. But like, you start to learn, like, I think like, eventually as you get to know the person, you feel comfortable and you can start to like hold hands, right? You're not going to do that with a friend, right? Like, so,
I kiss my homies goodnight, so.
Well, I don't know. Oh my. But anyways, so like, like there's certain very obvious hallmarks to it, right? There's, you talk a little bit more with someone you're dating as you've been dating for a little bit longer, right? There's a little more higher level of communication that you have. But that grows. So again, that should grow over time. You shouldn't be talking every night for 4 hours to the person that you just started dating. You shouldn't be like holding hands and like being lovey-dovey, like, so many like PDAs, with the person you just started dating. But over time, you develop the intimacy as the commitment grows, though. That's the important thing. That intimacy grows as commitment grows.
Then do you like the idea of setting like, 3 months in, that's when we'll like first, like, for example, like hold hands? Or
if
like
that
something
works
like
for
that?
people,
Or-
do it. Like, I'm all for that if that works. Do what works for you, right?
Okay.
In terms of having like understanding how you see commitment growing. And I'm always in favor of having like status reports in the dating relationship.
Status reports.
Therefore, like it gives clarity to direction, right? Because the truth is, at any point in a relationship, there's probably one person who's feeling a little confused at where it's going, if it's going in the right direction. And having those like status reports helps to like show like, oh yeah, this is where we're heading. This is sort of like, I guess, a general timeline we're thinking, because you want to be on the same page about those things. Again, not the first date. Don't set a timeline on the first date, because that's setting up too high expectations right away. But over time, you want to start to have a general sense of timeline. You want to have a general sense of where you are. You want to have a direction, because dating is supposed to be purposeful and intentional. There should be direction to it.
I like that. All right. Next. Ooh. What do you think about flirt to convert? Should a Christian date a non-Christian?
Well,
Missionary dating.
yeah. So the Bible, I think, is pretty clear that you shouldn't marry like a non-Christian, right? And I think most people would agree with that. And I don't think that's what that person is asking. They're asking like, can I date someone in the hopes that they might become a Christian? The Bible doesn't say clearly yes or no, but I think there's wisdom in saying probably not a good idea. I always like to say that compatibility in dating, the most important thing are your values. If you don't have common values, it's really hard to have a good relationship. And so if you are like have a misalignment of values on the most core and fundamental thing about you, then how can you have a good relationship? And so I think there's a lot of wisdom in saying not to. And honestly, just to be a little vulnerable, I share that as someone who actually became a Christian through a dating relationship. Someone who was a Christian, actually, I was in a relationship with, and that's sort of what initially drew me to Christianity. But I know that it makes it very tricky. I know that relationship eventually ended, and it was a little tough for me because it was a really strange experience for me to be learning to be a Christian while also like dating someone, and also knowing that like I started dating this person before I was a Christian, and so there was a little bit of a weird identity thing I was going through because I still remembered who I was before I was a Christian, but now I am a Christian, but dating this person still in both seasons, and it was just really complicated, and it didn't work out. And I would say, that should, like, there's a lot, I think, well, yes, you can say that's a success of being a Christian, but there was a lot of like, I think just, emotional pain that I think we went through that. And I would wish, I'd hope that people would be, a little wise around that and recognizing that, yeah, even if that person was Christian, there could be just emotional pain. Yeah, I just think wisdom says it's not the best
It's not
idea.
the best. But the Lord works redemptively through
the
all
Lord
things.
works still realize, right? He
Yes.
works all things. And so we can trust that he is good, but there's a whole multitude of things that we can say, right? It doesn't mean we should go do those bad things, right? Right?
Yeah. What then shall we say? Where sin abounds,
Yes,
grace abounds
exactly.
also, right? All right. Good answer. Is it possible to have known someone for too long to start dating them?
No. I mean, I don't know how much more to go into that except no.
This is
In some ways, sometimes
yeah.
it's best to actually like date someone that you're friends with because it allows you to sort of really know each other and have a clear sense of like if there is compatibility. It gets through some of the awkward beginning stages. So no, I don't think it's possible. I mean, yeah, obviously there is a little weirdness at first if you were friends with someone and you're like, wait, now we're like romantically involved. This is a little weird, but I mean, I feel like if you actually like each other, then that shouldn't be too like difficult to navigate.
Yeah. So you would view that as basically the same thing, except just starting further along on
Yeah.
the timeline? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I like that. I like these answers, P-Dog. Good stuff. All these spicy takes.
I mean,
that
so
aren't
to
that
go back, the
spicy.
truth is like really the person you're dating, like the first few, I think the weeks, months of it should be almost like friendship level because you're getting to know each other on a friend level, right? That's how you determine compatibility. Like if you can't even be friends, you can't be dating, right? And so like hopefully you can at least be friends and learn how to be
Yeah.
friends together, and then from there you allow it to grow. So
I like that. I like that. All right. Where's the wisdom in dating or looking to date a person from a different church?
yeah, when I asked that
community?
question, I'm like, I don't really understand because I mean we're not like a cult and saying that you can't date people from other churches or communities. So I mean, I think it's just the same wisdom as dating anyone else, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, hopefully they're a believer, right? We want to make sure that that church is like a Bible believing, gospel believing church, right? And if you believe that, if you're each believer, it's like you use the same wisdom. Yeah. But I think the important thing is that you should eventually, if the relationship continues and you start to move towards marriage, there should be a conversation had about which church family will be the one that you'll join as like a married couple. I think that's an important thing to talk through and really, and pray through in the process. But that shouldn't come until like you're engaged, right? I don't think people who just start dating should be like, whose church are you going to do? No, just stay your church. Don't move over just because you started dating, because if it doesn't work out, now you just left your community.
Yeah.
And so wait till like engagement to really have that conversation.
I like that. I like that. All right. Ooh, can you be friends with your ex?
Yes. And I would hope that you would be, right? I think the reason relationships end in ways that are very damaging is because there's probably boundaries that were broken at inappropriate times. And so there was missed expectations between each other. Meaning that each other weren't on the same page about what this relationship was and what it meant. And that meant there was either a lack of communication or a miscommunication, or there was just boundaries broken. And so if you're doing a healthy relationship, then the breakup should be fairly amicable because you should both be able to realize that, hey, this is probably not working out and let's just be friends. And so, yes, I think it's possible. But the truth is we're sinful. There's brokenness and everything. And so sometimes there is pain and trauma. Ultimately, there should be forgiveness. We should always pursue forgiveness in any type of relationship. We don't ever want to have unforgiveness in our heart because that will just become a root of bitterness that just festers and grows within us. I think we've talked about that in a previous episode. But reconciliation isn't always possible, though. And so sometimes if it's a really just like fiery sort of breakup, reconciliation might not be possible. But there still should be forgiveness. Forgiveness is always, always necessary. But yeah, I mean, I think it's possible, though. It just really depends on the nature of the breakup and how it all went out. But I think we should hope that it is possible.
Do you feel like there should be more boundaries around that relationship, though, if you're able to be friends with an ex?
Oh, for sure. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Because the issue is like that person might start, one or the other might start to think, oh, hey, we're like kicking things off as like good friends. Maybe this means that we might, so you want to make sure that you're not setting wrong expectations. If one person's like already completely closed the door, but the other person's like, I'm still kind of open. No, you want to make sure there's a lot of clarity. You want to be careful in that. And also, just to be frank, like, you shouldn't be friends with the person of opposite gender should have very strong boundaries. You shouldn't be like hanging out one-on-one with someone of the opposite gender unless you really like think you're pursuing them in some sort of way. It's just like, it's just a difficult thing to navigate. And I've just seen so many people hurt in those situations. And I think wisdom would say, just try to avoid that. I know everyone like, what about this? What about this? Well, fine. I'm sure they'd be fine thinking of some exceptions and certain things, but one of my least favorite phrases where people say, don't worry, this relationship is purely platonic. I've heard people say that all the time. And almost every time I heard someone say that, it wasn't. Like one person didn't realize it was. And then that person was hurt. Like that's my least favorite phrase because people always use that as the end to the debate. It's platonic. So therefore it is okay and good. But then like I said, I've seen so many times people use that phrase. Next thing you know, they come back and oh, actually the other person didn't think that, and now they're hurt.
Shoot.
Wisdom would say have very, very, very strong boundaries in friendships with like the opposite gender.
You see, all man's ways seem right to him, but in the end, it leads to death.
Yes.
Oh no.
Wisdom, right? Like we said.
Yeah, a little bit of Proverbs action.
Yeah.
All right. Next, when should you end a dating relationship?
That's a good question. I think you should end a dating relationship when it's pretty clear that this is not going to lead to marriage, right? There's pretty clear compatibility issues, and like I said, compatibility issues should be more around like the values and such, right? A compatibility issue isn't like, oh, this person, I don't know, wants to live in this city, this other person wants to live in that other city, like that's like that. Those things can be figured out, right? Ultimately, like. I think the biggest compatibility issues come to values. And so there's misaligned values. Yeah, you should probably end. But also if the other person's like, hey, I just don't see this heading to marriage, then you should probably, end. And so I would say like those are some of the things. Other than that, like I think, if you have conflict, the first sign of conflict, I feel like we should be careful not to end the relationship because conflict is not a sign of a broken relationship. It's honestly conflict's a sign of a growing relationship. And so if you have conflict, don't immediately think, oh, this means the relationship's going to end. Obviously, if you can't stop fighting, like you're just constantly in conflict, then maybe. But I would say seek wisdom from others first. Like talk to a pastor, talk to an older couple or married couple. Seek wisdom in that first. And I would say on all things before you end a relationship. Sometimes like people are too quick to pull the trigger, and that really hurts the other person. If they didn't feel the same way, I think you really should fight for a relationship, or at least try to see, if it's not really that big of an issue, maybe it's a bigger issue in your own mind. So seek wisdom, talk to others. Don't be so quick to pull a trigger without, getting wisdom first.
Do you feel like that threshold though is lower in the early stages of a relationship?
It depends. I mean, like just because you fight in your first week doesn't mean it's a broken relationship, right?
Sure.
You just might have two people who are a little more fiery, right?
But I mean, like even things like, it takes a lot of time to figure out what like someone's values are and stuff like that. Or like see them lived out, I suppose would be like.
Yeah. I mean, if you see a very clear break in the value up front, then you probably want to pull out of that, right?
Yeah. But then like even with upfront, like could those like I guess like, there's these things that you talked about, like living in the city, choosing which city you're going to live in, or maybe just like goals and stuff like that even, right? Like, could those things, preferential things, be lower the threshold in a sense, right? Earlier in the relationship, or do you still feel like that's
No, I think those things can work through, right?
Okay.
Because otherwise you just so quickly close yourself off, right?
Yeah.
And you don't allow this, chance, like actually change and be open, right? Because we should be willing to change our plans if we really feel like God is leading us towards someone, right? Like we shouldn't think our plans for our futures are like set in stone necessarily, because especially if you're like, early 20s, mid 20s, even like later 20s, like, right? Like we're still figuring out who we are, figuring out our calling in life, like don't be like, oh, I can't date you, even though like it could be a good relationship just because there might be different like direction we're heading in life. Right? No, like you don't know where you're heading in life yet. So be willing to just, see. So
next, how does it look to serve your partner practically?
Well, I think the biggest thing is putting the other's needs in front of your own. And that means not putting your own needs in front of this relationship. I mentioned before that sometimes, in many ways, the best way you can serve your partner is guarding the boundaries that you have. Because even if you feel like, oh, I want to push the boundaries a little bit, they might not feel that way. And if you push them, even though they might give in, they might have like a lot of regrets later. And so, anyways, the best way to serve them is by having clarity, having clear boundaries, and just respecting boundaries, respecting the other person. But apart from that, it's like, looking out for the other person, like praying for them, like asking them how they're doing, like caring about their soul. Like, I think that's the most important thing we serve. Like, if they're having a rough day, like just, reach out and say, hey, like, I'm praying for you. Like, let me know how I can support you right now. If they're sick, giving soup or something, like, things like that.
Homemade soup,
right? Yeah. There's so many different ways you can, but I think the most important thing is just looking out for the needs of the others, putting their needs in front of your own, dying to yourself, right? That's how relationships grow. Submitting, as it says in Ephesians, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ.
So how do you see that growing throughout the relationship? Because it's like, I guess that's like the common theme of this episode right here, right? It's like there's a timeline to everything, and we should take it slowly, right? So it doesn't make sense to immediately put all their needs in front of your own, right? When you're first like in that initial phase, but like how do you see that growing throughout?
Yeah, I mean, like when you're sort of like together too, right?
Yeah.
But it grows, right, over time. It's hard to like say a very clear cut path, but like if you just start dating, don't go and like be baking them like a cake every day and bringing it over, right? Because then you're just going to set yourself on a bad foot. Because then that person goes, all right, cool, I love this. I'm going to get like cake and cookies every day.
I'd take that.
I know, but are you going to be able to, is that person going to like continue that though? You know what I mean? It's like you just set yourself up on a wrong foot there, right?
That's
you just
true,
set these crazy expectations for yourself. And so I think it really it's about expectations, right? Too often like people like serve so much up front, and then it's like, all right, now that I feel like we're pretty good, I'm just going to kick it back. No, like you should be growing in your service towards the other. So I think that's important. But honestly, like one thing I used to say is that like one of the ways you're ready to date or not is if you're able to care. Like say you start dating someone, but then immediately like the week after that, like as soon as you start dating, early days, that person had like a death in the family or something where they're really grieving and they're going through a rough time and they're getting like, and you can tell they're a little more spiky than normal, right? They're reacting a little more emotionally. Are able to like love that person and care for them, even at that, right? Because too often when the other person's hurting and grieving and it takes extended time, you'd be like, hey, I don't want to deal with this. You can't lash out at me. You can't lash out at me. Like, no, like this person's struggling. Like you have to be willing to take it. And if you can't take it, then that probably means you're not ready to date because you're not ready actually to serve the other person. And so, if you're not able to care for someone when they're in like a very vulnerable state and serve them and put their needs in front of your own, then it probably shows that you're not ready in a position to actually date and actually serve another person.
I like that. I like that thought, P-Doug. Good stuff. All right, next. How important is being financially stable to getting married? I feel like we've talked about this before.
Yeah.
Off the podcast, but
I'd say it's not. It's less important than what people often make it out to seem. Because the reality is, it's like just because you're financially stable doesn't mean the relationship's going to work out. And just because you're financially unstable doesn't mean the relationship is going bad. And sometimes being together, actually, you're able to balance your finances when you're together, right? There's actually some economies of scale, even when you get married and are starting to like, if you get married and you move in together and, like you're sharing life together as a married couple because you're able to share like groceries, food, and just like utilities, all those kind of things, right?
Costco makes sense now.
Yeah, Costco makes sense now, right? There's so many benefits to getting married in terms of like finances. And so like, so in many ways it gets easier. I think we've overblown this idea that we need to be like stable before we get married. Because the reality is like, if we get stable before we get married, sometimes then when we get married, we more resistance to the the breaking of that stability, because then we have to get restabilized, right? So it's better to actually get stable as like in marriage, because if you get stable outside of marriage, you're going to have to just get restable because all that stability is going to be broken because now you're merging your life with another person. And I see a lot of people who struggle a lot in marriage because they've like found stability, and now that like all that stability got destroyed because now they are married. So I think sometimes it's better just to learn how to find stability together. And so, yeah.
What about in First Timothy, where it's like providing for your family, right, and stuff like that? I know maybe that's like a thought that I've had, or like other people I've talked to have had. Is like, I want to be in a spot where I'm financially stable enough to support a family immediately when I get married. Like, do you feel like that factors in, like at least the way that you're describing?
I would say then what's going on there, because if that person can't support themselves, If either person can't support themselves, how are they living right now, right?
Yeah.
Are they, or is it because they're entirely supported by their parents? And if that's the case, then yeah, maybe marriage isn't right. They haven't, they're still, because they're still an adolescent, right? If you're being supported by your parents, no matter what age you are, that means you're still adolescent. You aren't ready to be married. So I'd say you probably need to have some level of independence, right, from your family. Not fully. Like some people, like, their parents pay for their insurance or their cell phone or things like that. And I'm not saying you have to be free of all those things, but if your parents are your prime supporters and like giver of like your finances, then yeah, you're probably not ready to be married. But if there's two people who are single, they should be able to at least, and they're able, like, even just barely support one another, they should be able to support one another as a married couple too. Yeah.
Okay.
Doesn't mean you have to be living. Doesn't mean you have to have like like 100K in the bank and all that, right?
Yeah.
But like you're at least able to like get by. You'll probably be in a better position actually once you get married.
Neither poverty nor riches. All right.
Your favorite verse?
Yes. Well, I mean, it's the verse that's been on my mind a lot since I've been thinking about my daily bread a lot. So yeah. All right. If one of the points of marriage, this is an interesting question.
Well, just to summarize this one, right, I think it's just about children, right?
Should you have kids?
Yeah.
Right. And what if you choose not to have kids in a marriage? Yeah.
No, I don't think it's sinful or wrong to not have kids. Obviously, you want to check your heart and know why, right? Like, do you not want to have kids because like you want to live this wild, crazy like life? Then it's like, well, why even getting married, right? And a second thing is you want to make sure your spouse, or like, if you're dating or engaged, like your fiance isn't in alignment with you. You don't want to have misalignment. This is one of those core values that I talked about, right? Having children, because if one person wants to have children, the other person doesn't, man, that's going to be really difficult to navigate. And so, you want to make sure you figure that out before you get married. But I don't think it's wrong to not have kids. And the reality is some people can't have kids, right? Sometimes there's, issues, right? Fertility issues or, other things like that. And it's not wrong, right? And I think adoption is perfectly fine as well. There's nothing wrong with adoption. I don't think anyone should see that as like a black mark in any way. And just choosing also just to be a married couple without kids, I think that's fine as well. And in some ways, sometimes it frees you up to be able to do more for the kingdom even. But I think the most important thing is just to go to the Lord and understand his heart for you. Because ultimately, like I bet you before, singleness is a calling, being a marriage is a calling, being a parent is a calling as well. And if you feel like the Lord is calling you into that, you don't be disobedient to his call.
I like that. Yeah. Unless the Lord builds the house, the workers build it in vain.
But to summarize, you don't have to have kids, and they certainly don't have to be biologically yours, right? Adoption, I think, is very acceptable in the kingdom. It's a very good way, God honoring means of parenting.
That's how
we're adopted as children, right?
Yeah.
We ourselves are adopted, right?
Ephesians 1.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I like that. Okay, this is the last question. Wow, we made it through a lot.
Yeah, we did.
This is quite hefty. It was heftier than I thought it was going to be, but we like that. We like that for this podcast. Gets so many views, right?
It was a heavy mailbag we were carrying.
Yeah, exactly. That you were carrying and you unloaded here. What's that say about our relationship, P-Doug? Anyways.
A little imbalanced.
A little bit imbalanced. But when you get married, do things that were hard when you were dating go away, or does it continue? Yeah.
I mean, to be frank, like there's some things get easier. Communication's easier. Though obviously you can start taking it for granted. But I would say it's a lot less tiring and stressful to be able to talk to a person in person at like home versus having like a conversation on the phone. And also like even just like spending time together, right? It's very tiring to have to like go out and to do something together because you know that you don't live together. But once you're married and you live together, like it's a lot less tiring to spend time together because you don't have to like think about going out somewhere. Sometimes you can just stay and have a night together in the house, right? So those kind of things make, I think, the relationship a little easier, just from like a logistical standpoint. But obviously not everything gets fixed, right? Any issues that caused you to fight beforehand aren't magically going to go away just because now you have rings on your fingers, right? Like there's going to be those same issues are going to come up, and you want to continually work through those issues and seek wisdom on how to overcome them. But yeah, so I'd say like some things get easier, but not everything, right? A lot of the emotional stuff will still be there, and yeah, maybe, and sometimes the honeymoon phase will allow it to like not be bad. But just to say there though, like, sometimes when people have their first fight as a married couple, it makes them feel like, oh, I can't believe we're fighting. Like this must be a sign of bad marriage. No. Like I feel like every couple fights on their honeymoon, because well, the truth is like a marriage, like the wedding is a very stressful time, like there's so many things that are happening. And then like when you go on this honeymoon, you're like tired now from all the wedding and planning and everything. And it can be very easy to like get into a fight, and you each have like different pictures of what the honeymoon is supposed to look like, and so sometimes those expectations can be like missed, and so yeah, you can fight. Just because you fight in your honeymoon does not mean you have a broken relationship. It just means that you are two people, you're two human beings who are coming to conflict, right? That just happens, and like I said before, conflict often is a sign of a growing relationship. So don't be afraid of conflict. So things won't resolve just because you got married, but it also means that you should be continue working on those things. Marriage, just because you got married doesn't mean your relationship is completed. It's actually the beginning of a journey together, of a journey of continuing to grow the relationship.
I like that. Well, many profound thoughts today, Pastor Doug, on dating and marriage. Yes, and a fantastic opener on friendship. What more could you ask for?
What more could you ask for?
Yeah, what more could we pack into a podcast episode?
Oh, there's certainly more, but we'll spare everyone.
Yeah, the mailbag has gotten significantly lighter.
Yeah, thank you for carrying my burdens, Caleb.
No problem. Galatians 6:2, bear one another's burdens. But then each man will bear his own. What, in 6:5? I forget. Anyways.
Yeah, it's a little confusing, but that's not the point of this podcast.
Yeah. Jokes. But do you have any concluding thoughts, P. Doug, to wrap up like this whole relationship sort of thing?
Accountability. Just remember, we do all relationships happen in community. Let's not be afraid to ask others for support, for wisdom, for prayer. That's why we have the church. That's why we have one another, to be able to bear one another's burdens.
Oh, there it is. Wait, it was about Galatians 6:2 all along.
All along. It was Galatians 6:2 all along.
Yeah, it's like that one. Anyways, you know what meme I'm talking about, right? Like,
no, I don't. But
okay.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I was thinking it's Agatha all along from WandaVision, but
oh no, I was thinking like that one where it's like the two astronauts. It was like, wait, that's all the Earth?
Yeah, always was. Always has been. Yeah.
Wait, it's Galatians 6:2? Always has been.
What a great way to close.
I like that. But you have been listening to Grace Covenant Chats, brought to you by Grace Covenant Church here in Philadelphia. If you're new here, go check us out at philly.gracecovenant.net and join us on Meyerson for our series on stewardship, which is a little bit different from relationships, but we finished that up like a month ago.
Yeah, about
a month ago. I haven't been in church in a month. That's why I don't know. But it's okay. But we will see you next time.